All right, everyone. It is 2 o'clock, and hopefully my mic is working okay. Good afternoon. I am Taylor Post, Swiftland's Office Manager, and I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Customer Service Masterclass, Catch 'em by the Tail, and today's presenter, Linda Bruno. Linda Bruno has been developing and conducting training workshops for libraries and other organizations for more than 15 years. She offers workshops on topics ranging from leadership skills to returning balance and lots of areas in between. Linda received her MBA from the University of Florida and has years of experience in hands-on management positions. She develops her workshops based on solid research and, more importantly, real-life application. Linda is also certified with DDI and Achieve Global. Please welcome Linda and enjoy her webinar this afternoon. Linda?
Thanks so much, Taylor, and welcome today to the class on Catch 'em by the Tail. I had a friend who emailed the other day and he said, "What are your webinars on this week?" And I told him about this one, and he said, "Winnie and Gray Kitty are very upset about the name." So let me just assure you that no animals have been harmed in the creation of this webinar called Catch 'em by the Tail. I thought that was a cute take on that. But that's exactly where the idea, the theory of long tail marketing comes from. So I want you to think about that, and I want you to think about this picture. Type into the chat box, what do you notice about the long tail in the image that you see on your screen? What do you notice? There's a clue right in the title, actually, but what do you notice about the tail that's there in the image if you look at that as a head and a tail? I see several of you typing, so I'm going to hold on a moment. It's long, exactly. And Glenn said, just Lena said it's long. Glenn said it's longer than the head. And Jan said it's longer than the body. Amy said the arrow means it keeps going. Absolutely. And here's the whole premise of today's session is that when the person that first did this research, if you will. His name is Chris Anderson. He was the editor in chief of Wired magazine, which is a computer oriented magazine, technology oriented magazine, I should say, not computers. But it's longer and it keeps going. And what he was talking about was we get really focused on that head, just like you see on the screen. The bulk of our efforts are in red so many times because we need to take care of all of the people that are in the head of our long tail marketing graphic. Of course, we're going to do that. We are going to take care of youth, and we are going to take care of teens, and we are going to take care of adults, and we are going to take care of some of the more obvious groups that are in our community that need the services from our library. So when you think about it, it only makes sense to do that. But on the other hand, the next question, and these are all on your handouts, and Taylor sent you the handouts with the login information. So you might want to print those off or have a piece of paper that you can take some notes on, because we're going to cover a lot of categories and things like that today that should be helpful to you, not just today or tomorrow, but also 6 months down the road when you start thinking about what else can we do for our community. So when you're thinking about that long tail, why do you think it's important to catch them by the tail? We're talking about how long it is, how much longer than the head it is, how it keeps going. So why do you think it's important to catch them by the tail? When I say catch them, that of course means our customers and our patrons. Why do you think that would be important? After all, we've got a big chunk of people right there in the head of that animal, if you want to call it that. There's a big bunch of people right there. So is it really that important to pay any attention to our long tail? And just to give you a little glimpse into my weird way of thinking, what I've been trying to do with the customer service masterclass is not only cover some of the basics that we can tend to overlook sometimes because we get so busy, we've kind of touched on some of those, but also to get you to look at things from a different perspective. Not that you haven't ever looked at these areas before, but sometimes when we just have that fresh perspective, as in thinking of it as a long tail, it can actually open our eyes to things we had never thought about before. So let me look at some of these responses here. Terry said you want to grab their attention. Absolutely. You want to grab the attention of everybody, don't you, Terry? Because that's what your library is all about. And Joselina said we need to catch them by the tail to keep our libraries open. Exactly. If we, the people that are in the head of that animal or the body of that animal, those big chunks of people that make up the head and the body, they're already pretty sold on our library. They're already serviced well, and we continue to find new things to do for them as we should. So that's going along fairly smoothly. But in order to keep our libraries open, we've got to make sure we're tapping into any other areas that we can be helpful in. Glenn said, yes, it establishes and ensures longevity regarding engagement. Exactly. And if we don't have that, George said, flip the graph, the tail actually may be more folks. Exactly. If you look at that long tail, there may be a lot more individual categories within that long tail than there are in the head and the body. But if you totaled all of the smaller categories, it might turn out to be bigger. And as Glenn said, we need to ensure longevity because if we don't, what happens to our funding? If people aren't loyal and we don't have that sustainability factor of bringing them into our libraries, it's harder to sustain funding, isn't it? It's harder to advocate for our libraries. It's harder to compete for the money that's out there in funding because it's been a long time since the pot of money available to us was big enough that they just handed it out haphazardly. As a matter of fact, I can't remember when that happened. But we all know there were days where it wasn't nearly as restricted as it is now. So as we think about that, we want to make sure we're doing things, of course, to serve our community. That's first and foremost. That's our mission. That's our vision. That includes our values, all those things. That's wonderful. But we also want to make sure that we're getting our piece of the pie because there is competition out there, isn't there? So you type into the chat box. We've probably talked about this at a different customer service session. But what competition do you have? What competition does your library specifically have? All campus departments, absolutely. Each other, yes. Libraries compete. I have people tell me every once in a while, it's not rare by any means, that they don't actually go to the library that's closest to them. They go to the library where they feel welcome, where they feel like somebody's paying attention to them. Jocelyn said our website is our competitor as well. That's true too. As far as physical bodies, luckily our websites provide statistics usually that will show we had fewer people actually walk in this month because it was raining all month, but our website statistics went up by 15%. So as a whole, it still makes our library valuable, doesn't it? But it's harder on the website to find the pieces of our long tail that we need to be paying attention to because we don't know who those people are. And when they come into the library, we can open up discussions with them. We can ask them questions. We can observe what they're doing, what they're checking out, what they're interested in, all those kinds of things. And Beth said, we don't have an assigned budget. So then you really have to fight for it, don't you? And Jan said, online, downloading books. I'm going to confess to you, you all know I'm very honest with you. I download a lot of ebooks onto my e-reader, and I download most of them from BookBub because I don't always get around to reading them and I don't want them to disappear from my e-reader and all those kinds of things. And so it's just a matter of convenience for me. So in that respect, BookBub is a competitor, right? And so we need to be doing more things to make sure we're catching those people by the tail because the competition is out there. We also have anything online as competition, right, for your library. Anything online. This same friend that was offended because he wasn't offended, he was joking. His cats were offended because I was talking about catching him by the tail. Also had to change out his computer last week. And I said, I just read that the World Wide Web is 30 years old. And I kind of wanted to get in somebody's face about it because there are days where I think I'm so much worse off for having all of that, but we all know we use it, and so do our patrons, and so do our customers. So we might as well acknowledge it. How can we have a leg up on all of those competitors, whether it's Amazon online or it's the Barnes and Noble bookstore that I've got just a couple miles down the road that has coffee. And, I have to buy it, but it still has coffee and it has all those magazines and it has all those fun things. And so there's a lot of competition. Gabe said just about everything that the library offers there is a for-profit company doing a similar or same thing. Exactly, Gabe. And so we have to set ourselves apart, not only with the head and body of this creature that we're trying to assist in our communities, but also with that tail so that when people in those smaller groups need something, they might think of their libraries first. And that's what we're trying to encourage is that the library would be the first thing that would come to mind for them. Because as you said, there's somebody out there that can do everything we can do, basically. I read a blog the other day by a library person, and the whole blog was about their library of things. And in their area, which is a fairly rural area, one of the things that they needed to lend out was a saw that cuts off tree limbs. Now, I got to tell you, if any of you have been around more than 5 or 6 years or 10 or whatever, that would have been unheard of. But it's part of the long tail, isn't it? It's part of that feature that not everybody that walks into their library needs to cut down limbs, but they have found a reason to bring those people into the library. And I just think that's so cool. How many of you, just kind of off topic for a moment, how many of you have a library of things? And if you do, just put one item in there that's kind of unusual that you check out. Would you take a moment to do that? Because I think that's a great customer service tool we can be using. Ah, yes, those virtual reality headsets. People love those. Bird watching backpacks. I love that. That must include, I'm thinking binoculars, maybe a book on Florida birds or whatever. That's really cool. I'm going to hold off for a minute because I think these are great ideas for us to jot down. Storytime kits. Yeah, I even saw those advertised the other day on one of the emails I got from one of the library groups I subscribed to. And they were talking about that they were selling them, of course, but they were talking about how helpful that is for storytime, just the kit, especially to mothers of preschoolers or homeschoolers or things like that, schools that don't necessarily get involved as much with the library, those kinds of things. I see Jan is also typing, so I'm going to give that a moment to pop up before we move on. Jan said discussion book kits for both adults and children. People love to discuss topics, but nobody wants to take the lead on how do we figure out what we're supposed to discuss. And if you have a kit, then that just makes it easier for them. When you look at that, does Amazon or Barnes and Noble offer a VR headset or a bird watching backpack or a storytime kit or a book kit or anything like that? No. I mean, there are study books, if you wish, book club kinds of study guides and things like that on Amazon, but in reality, you have to kind of be the leader to even think to look there to get that kit. Umbrellas is another thing, and in Florida, that's a necessary thing, isn't it? Hot spots for veterans. Yeah, things that people need that maybe nobody else has thought of. Or even if they've thought of it, they don't really have an avenue to serve those people. Amy makes her own study guides. That's great for book group. That's wonderful. So let's think about this a little bit. You don't have to think about specific groups, but what are some of the categories we might want to look at as we're trying to find pieces of your community's long tail? I'll give you one to begin with. It might be gender. So you sit down and you think, okay, in the gender category, where might there be a piece of that long tail that isn't really being served at the moment? So just take a moment. If you're taking notes on your sheet on page 1, right in the middle, there are a lot of lines there for you to write down what we're talking about. Absolutely. All the things you're talking about, non-binary, LGBTQ, gender queer, all those kinds of things. So transgender, all the things that are more obvious, not obvious, that's the wrong word, but we're more aware of them nowadays than we used to be. And so now we know that there are people out there that may need things from our library that they're not getting from someplace else. So that might be a niche group under gender. Think about homeschool families. Absolutely. Think about age groups. Homeschool families might be in that, right, Glenn? There might be a bunch of different niches in the age group category. So I want you to think about that for a minute. And please, everybody in the room, we have a lot of people here today. The more ideas we generate today, the longer your tails are all going to get, right? And so the more we can do that, then the next time things have kind of calmed down for you, you can look around and say, let me look at my list of what's in my long tail or what might be in my long tail that I'm not even aware of. So when you think of age groups, who do you think of? Retirement homes, absolutely. George, I'm going to expand on that a little bit. I want you to think beyond retirement homes. And I'm using air quotes here that I know you can't see, so I'll let Deb use air quotes so you can see her do that. But here's something that happened to me over a decade ago. And I'm not elderly by any means, but I walked into a J.C. Penney store here in Ocala over 10 years ago and just needed some things and walked in there and there was loud screaming music on, and I'm talking screaming music. Now typically you might find something like that in a fast-paced restaurant or something like that where they're trying to get you in and out, but you don't usually find it in a store where they want you to wander around for a while because they want you to impulse buy. And you're not going to do that if you're in and out like a shot. I will honestly tell you, I probably haven't been in that penny store more than 6 times since then in a decade because it just put me off. I'm a niche market now, even though I'm not elderly. I'm not in a retirement home. Hope to never be in a retirement home, not because they're bad, but because I want to stay active. But there is getting to be in our society a bit of a disconnect between the bulk of society, the head and body that we're looking at, and the people who are still very active, even though the calendar shows they have more years than most of the people in the head and body. Does that make sense? So we need to make sure that we're not just limiting that to retirement homes, but who's that group in between that wants to stay active? I live in a 55 up community. Just saying, I was not old enough to move here when I moved here. My husband was. So I just want to clarify that. However, my community has between 650 and 800 classes every semester. They are in, even though the whole community is made up of that makeup, they are in a niche market that they have found is not being served. There are classes on discussions about Socrates. There are classes on today's politics. There are classes on studying movies. There are classes on watercolor painting and staying, just obviously hundreds of classes. That's what I want you to think about. Oh, George, I like that. Rehab centers, absolutely. So retirement homes, rehab centers, millennials, if they're not, and that would be one, wouldn't it, Nadine? Because we think of youth and we think of children's services and we think of teens, and the millennials might be another group that even though we hear about them every day on the news, they might be dropping through the cracks. So be thinking about this as we're going through these. Tweens, absolutely. A couple of you mentioned tweens that they kind of get left out, don't they? And George had said rehab centers post as in post-surgery hip replacement. Yeah, because I've talked to people in their 40s that are having their hips replaced just because they've been so active. So it's not something that has to do, although we call it age group, maybe life stage would be another comment, right? Another way of looking at that particular niche. She doesn't shop there either. It just wasn't me. That's all I'm saying. Neighborhood community centers, baby boomers, absolutely. Now I'm going to do a little plug here, and I don't know if I'm allowed, but did you know that Swiftland is having a baby boomer face-to-face workshop coming up in July? I'm going to just plug this for a second, Taylor. I hope you'll forgive me. I have to look at my date. July 23rd. It's called Is 70 the New 50? And we are going to spend the day looking at how we can better serve baby boomers. So just so you know, if you have a chance to go to any face-to-face workshops, that's going to be a fun one, I think. So absolutely, neighborhood community centers, babies themselves. Not that you're going to go directly to the baby. Of course, you're going to go to the parent. But how often do we wait until they're old enough for story time? Maybe there's something you can do in a niche market for babies rather than waiting until they're old enough for story time or until mom feels like they're old enough for story time. But as I mentioned, when we're thinking about age groups, also break that down a little bit into life stage because life stage can be in school, recently graduated, on your own for the first time, just got married, just got divorced, middle age, raising a family, widowed, and then up into the baby boomers, the retirement centers, all those kinds of things. So when you think about life stage, that's one that kind of also isn't always in our vision because we're thinking about specific age groups, not what's going on in the lives of those age groups. Gabe said we offer baby story time. It's one of the most popular story times we offer. Good, Gabe, because you know what? I think people are figuring out that the more children hear reading and words and things like that, the better adjusted they are to reading and words and all those kinds of things. I've even heard of people who make a practice of reading to the baby in the womb because I think it's called Babble. I think there's an actual kit or something for that. But anyway, we know that there is a good reason for that. Job transitions, absolutely. And that's going on in your community all the time, isn't it? We do webinars sometimes on how to help with interviewing skills, how to help with resume skills, all those kinds of things. It's an area that for those people, they already feel left out in the cold because they lost their job or they're underemployed or they just got out of school or whatever it is. They already feel like they're out in limbo somewhere. So if we can grab hold of them and help them with their job skills, then we're going to be valuable to them. Yes, Nadine, it is interesting. It's just baby story time. I love that too. Other baby related activities, sure, that you can do. Absolutely. So, life stage is another one to think about within the gender, within the age group, because we kind of get that tunnel vision about those being big categories, which they, of course, are. But then let's break it down to life stage. Maybe even grandparents raising grandchildren. That presents a whole different set of problems. And there are so many more of those people now than there were a few years ago. So that might be another niche group in the life stage category. What are people's interests in general? Now we think of some really common ones like knitting and crocheting and photography and those kinds of things. But can anybody name something that you do at your library for a particular interest group, if you will, that we might not have thought of before today? I see several of you typing, which is wonderful. My scroll bar is not scrolling. It's scrolling up on the side, but it's not scrolling up comments. So if there's a bit of a delay from me, that's the reason. Career changers, absolutely, Glenn. Pint-sized Pollux won a PALA award. Good, good. In between jobs, absolutely. Artists, entertainers, that scroll bar is driving me crazy. Artists and entertainers, yeah. People that, gosh, you really don't think about them as groups you need to be catering to, do you? Scrapbooking, improv comedy. And there's so many amateurs at that would love to try it, kind of like karaoke for comedy, right? Similar kind of idea. People love trying those kinds of things. Card and jewelry making. Again, people love to try it, but they don't really have a place to try it. Acting classes, origami, Spanish customer service class. Absolutely. All of the above. I hope some of you are getting some good ideas here. Platform for comedians, musicians, poets, etc. Genealogy sessions, because even though we may know that the library offers that, we don't have any clue how to start. My stepdaughter texted me a few weeks ago and she said, what was dad's grandma and grandpa's name? So I knew that. So I got that back to her and I said, and his uncle's names were this and that. And she sent me something back about an hour later and she goes, look what I found. And she had found birth and death for grandma and grandpa Bruno, her great grandma and grandpa. So that was kind of cool. But genealogy, absolutely. Toastmasters, yes, because people love to learn to speak in public and things like that. And Toastmasters is helpful for that. And the library is sort of a non-threatening environment, isn't it? Which would be the public speaking. Yes, exactly. I'm trying to read. You guys are so good. Computer classes, many, many kinds, and maybe some niche marketing there. Does somebody just need to know how to do an Excel spreadsheet? And rather than just computer classes in general, maybe at their new job, they need to learn something more in depth. Training to help young people get their first job. Absolutely. Meditation classes, yoga and Tai Chi. I may pronounce this wrong, Glenn. Qigong, yoga class for babies, and meditating again. You've got some excellent ideas here that I hope all of you in this room are picking out at least one that you can pull from at some point in the future and say, you know what, here's a bit of our long tail that we need to be looking at to see if we can be helpful to people. Pause to read. I have a feeling that has something to do with doggies. There might even be a chance for you to do some partnering or reaching out, collaborating with local hospitals, or like I think it was George or Glenn were saying earlier, rehab centers and things like that to see what they think might be good at the library. Maybe it's beyond the scope of what they can do, but there's something that the library could help with. Self-defense classes, Latin dance, cooking. And then think of the ways you can break that down. You can break that down into cultural cooking, into age group cooking, because a person just got out of college is going to cook differently than somebody who has a family of four. You can do a lot of that with niche marketing. So you can catch them by the tail by figuring out what it is that they might need that maybe they could find it if they really dug for it, but how many people really dig for those kinds of things? Selena said English cafe and El Cafe. Absolutely. All of the above. Hobbies, we kind of wrapped up into what we were just talking about with the meditation and the yoga and things like that. But we also talked about scrapbooking and photography and knitting and crocheting and painting and all those kinds of things for hobbies. So sign language classes for adults, absolutely, and or children. Physical therapy classes. Now, some of you are going, oh, we can't do that, we can't do that. But think about everything you're already doing that you couldn't do 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And there may still be some that you can't do because of legal issues or safety issues or liability issues or something like that. So what I'm asking you to do here is just stretch your mind today to not get tunnel vision, because I'm guilty of that as well. I think about the topics that I cover, and everything tends to branch off of those topics. Many years ago, it's been about 12 years ago now, one of my clients said, Linda, I want you to do a class on emotional intelligence. And I went, huh. Now that's, to me now, is a very natural fit for Linda Bruno. But back then I thought, well, I've heard that term. I've read a couple of articles. It's very interesting, but I never thought of me doing that. Now it's one of my favorite topics. Now I think it can be life-changing for people. So do you see how you start pulling out these ideas and thinking, how can we help those little chunks of our tail do better, live a richer life, a fuller life, learn more, develop more, all those kinds of things, because that's what we're talking about here. Gardening classes for adults. Not only that, Lena, but maybe children. Because if children learn where their food comes from, they've shown they eat healthier if they learn where their food comes from. They help take care of their food. Maybe they even learn how to store their food, freeze it or whatever, prepare their food, all those things. Family reading time. I love that. The whole family. Not the little kids, not the big kids, not just mom, not just dad, just the whole family read time. Elizabeth says, I think living situation is a category we don't think of often enough. Absolutely. And I kind of lump that into life stage, but how can we reach and serve? Yes, prisoners, homeless, refugees, foster children. I have social needs as one of my categories that I'll talk about here in just a minute. And so all of those come into play, don't they, when we're thinking about pieces of our long tail. If this is something that really interests you, this idea just popped into my head because I'm a very visual person. I would challenge you to draw a long tail on a huge poster board, maybe just the tail. You can go down the left side of it and do a little bit of the body just to show that there is a body there, but then draw that long tail along the long side and ask staff members to write ideas for different parts of the long tail. And you've had several dozen here already today that we don't maybe typically think about, but there are definitely areas that we can reach those people. I have down Movie nights, yes, absolutely. People are very aware of watching their budgets nowadays, and we can do things like that for people that don't cost them anything, that give them entertainment, that keep the kids out of trouble maybe because they're in the library instead of roaming around or whatever. And so why not do movie nights, family movie nights, or whatever it might be? When I think of another category in your tail, think about behavioral tendencies. Maybe if you have introverts and I know you do, introverts and extroverts in your community, is everything geared toward the extroverts because they're the people that really like to interact. They're the people that really like to have fun. They're the people that really like people around them. But I'm hearing more and more now as I read about libraries that are either remodeling, expanding, or building new, that they are building or remodeling quiet spaces. And they don't say it directly, but I believe that's coming from the awareness in recent years of introverts needing quiet space to recharge, to study, to really grasp things, to really process things. And so behavioral tendencies, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, might give you a little piece of a long tail where you can maybe somebody wants to come to the library and be quiet, which is what people always came to the library 4 years ago. And now it's not as common. So they might need some kind of an activity where it's just a quiet study night or something like that. So one of those little niches that they might feel left out of the world because nobody's really thinking about that. Of course, ethnicity, you have all kinds of categories you can open up there. You can do, like I said, you can do cooking, you can do studies of ethnicities, you can do traditions of ethnicities, all kinds of things that we can open up there. Cultural needs. We talk a lot about ESL classes and Spanish speaking classes and things like that. But is that all the need there is in the different cultures that are in your communities? I wish I could remember the exact culture a lady was telling me about. It's been 3 or 4 years ago now, but it was something about Creole, and it surprised me. But they had a very, very large community of maybe French Creole in their community, and then somebody else had a large community of Croatians in their community. So cultural needs might be very big. Yes, Lena, absolutely. Gamers, sure, even though we know about gamers, we do maybe do a lot for gamers, but maybe there's a niche marketing within that that you can think about, okay, here are the most popular games, but maybe some families don't really like those games. Absolutely, manga and anime fans, all kinds of people like that, right? They're out there. Let's tap into that. We talked about social needs already a little bit, but maybe there's a niche market of people that hang out at the bar. There are libraries now doing books and brew, and they do book clubs at a bar or at a brewery, usually is what it is, or at a bar that has craft brews, local brews, those kinds of things. Those are social needs, aren't they? People, if they're into craft brewing, you don't get in the way of them and their craft brewing. So why not take advantage of that, right? Jan's going to go to that one. That would be fun, wouldn't it? I haven't been to one, but I know there are some up in the Panhandle, which you might not normally think of, but that was the first place I heard of it a few years ago. You might not normally think of it up there because it's kind of rural up there. But when you think of that fact, that's where they gather. That's where their community is. So that would be the social needs aspect. Financial needs. Type into the chat box an unusual program or service that you either know of or you already do at your library that's a little different than what we would normally expect regarding financial needs. Because to me, this covers your entire tail. Everybody else that's in your tail in different aspects and different categories could probably also be served under some category of financial needs. Not that they're destitute, not that they're living in poverty, not that they're homeless, not that they're bankrupt, but I listen when I exercise every morning, I listen to Dave Ramsey while I'm doing my resistance exercise, and I listen to Clark Howard when I'm on the treadmill. And I'm doing okay. My bills are paid. I don't have any debt, all that kind of stuff, but it keeps me aware of what my goals are in life. So even though I'm not in a category where I would necessarily need ways to get out of debt or anything like that, there's still always a need for that. Saving for retirement, free tax assistance for the elderly. And should we really just stop at the elderly, Gabe? Is there a niche market there for free tax assistance for other people, right? Because when I see people come to the library, oftentimes when I'm with a face-to-face program and it's during tax season, it usually is somebody that's a little older that's coming in, knocking on the door of our face-to-face workshop, wanting to know where the tax people are. So I'm going to say that it's there. Yes, Dave Ramsey, Financial Peace University, very helpful to people, isn't it? If they'll use it. So absolutely, there are other age groups, free tax assistance, coffee and conversations for homeless patrons or transition. Absolutely. And it's not threatening, is it? So that's another thing I'm going to throw in here that you've probably heard me say. Please be careful of the titles of your programs. If you have a financial program and call it financial literacy, the chances are, and I'm not saying positively, but the chances are you will have less attendance because people are intimidated by the title, financial literacy, which means if I have to come there, I'm financially illiterate. So be careful of that. I had a lady in a program and she said, I could have a program how to cut your budget 30% overnight because I had to do that when my husband was laid off for his job from his job. And I said, then that's what your title should be. And then call in other people that can give you tips on how to cut your budget 30% overnight or 20% or whatever it is. But that title will bring more people in from that long tail, won't it? Rather than the people that are just used to hearing library terms like financial literacy that might be in the body and head of our big animal, then people that are in that long tail that maybe don't get as much exposure to our library would not be intimidated as much by a workshop that said how to cut your budget 30% overnight. So be aware of that as well. Disaster assistance for hurricanes. Sarah, I love that idea. A couple of years ago when Irma came through, I was reading everything. What do I need to do to be prepared? I filled my bathtub with water and then found out that the water really didn't get shut off, but there still could have been an issue, so it was okay. Nobody told me to wrap the frozen berries that I had in my freezer before the power went off for 3 days. And I went out to my kitchen one morning once it got light because I didn't have any power. And I thought something had happened to one of the animals because there was red all over my kitchen floor and the berry bag had leaked out the freezer once it thawed. So yeah, that's kinds of, even though it's not disaster assistance, it's certainly a very trivial problem, but it's those kinds of things we don't tell anybody during a hurricane. You know, we talk about what to do if the power goes off, but it's more about air conditioning and heat and all that kind of thing. So anything we can help with. Gabe, so we've found that most people are a little older in age. I agree, Gabe, with the tax services. Absolutely. And Lena said we have free tax services to everybody. College financial prep. I love that idea because on Dave Ramsey, on Clark Howard, almost every day they talk about the cost of attending school. They get calls from people that are $300,000 in debt because of their school loans. When I did my graduate work just a few years ago, I graduated 6 years ago from the University of Florida. Yes, I'm a late bloomer. But when I did that, I took out a loan because my husband had been sick and I wanted to make sure we had our bills paid and all that. It's paid for now, but I took out the loan and they sent me an extra $3,000 on the very first check. And I said, what is this for? I called them up and I said, I'm not going to pay interest on $3,000 I don't need for this semester. And she said, oh, that's just for incidentals. And it was like my head exploded. And I thought that's one of the big problems for people going to college is they're given this money. Nobody's really looking, tuition's this much, checks this much more. I can go to Starbucks, I can go to Chipotle, I can do this and that. And then they end up with so much extra debt. So absolutely financial awareness, financial freedom. Selena says SAT and ACT prep courses and college admissions readiness workshops. Okay, let's go a little farther out on the tail. I would have loved to have found a GMAT, GMAT, if you've never heard of that, preparation course before I went to take the test to get my MBA because I almost didn't pass. It's been too long since I've been out of school. There was a huge chunk of it on things like, I don't know, geology or something. It was just bizarre, some of the things that were on there. So think about adding that now to your long tail because that's if it was there, I didn't find it. It might have been there, but I didn't find it. So other categories that you could talk about are community needs, which we've covered quite a bit. Career interests, remember we talked about, are they in transition? Do they need a new career? Are they changing careers? So what might those niches be in your community for career interests? We'll look around. What's in your community? What jobs are available in your community? And that might be something to start targeting a little bit. Health needs. We talked a little bit about that with rehab, with yoga, with meditation. That's all incorporated in that. But maybe somebody comes in and talks about vitamin supplements or, the best things if your cholesterol's high or whatever it might be. But health needs, we certainly have enough of those in our community that there are probably chunks of them in our long tail. Terry said, inform patrons there are links on library websites for testing and studying. Absolutely. And people probably would know that if they really dug into it or thought about it, but they just don't think about it because it's not what they do to make their living, right? And so they need to be told about it or they need to be exposed to it a little bit. Gabe said the Diabetes Academy to help them maintain good health. Absolutely, because you know what? Even if somebody's just pre-diabetic, it's going to help their heart health. It's going to help their energy levels. It's going to help so many things if they're aware of what needs to be done if they're pre-diabetic or diabetic. Transportation needs might be a niche category. I'm not sure exactly what you do that, but that word came to mind when I was doing my brainstorming, and I thought, okay, there may be people that have transportation needs. Is there a way you can make that connection at the library for carpooling or whatever it might be? I don't know. So the word came to mind and I wrote it down and I thought I'm not quite sure where that one's going, but there you go. Nadine said our county offers transportation services to the disabled. Gabe says we offer free bus route maps for our community. There you go. Those kinds of things. Y'all have covered a lot of stuff already. I'm going to say we have at least 3 or 4 dozen individual, unique, unusual things that we can put into our long tail. So what I want to ask you now is, which ones might you want to take a closer look at? Take a minute to scroll back through the scroll bar, jot down 1 or 2 or 3. Don't try to do them all at once, but jot down 1 or 2 or 3. Lena said, informing the patrons of free transportation services. Sure, they don't know who to ask. That's part of the problem, isn't it? And Candace said, we offer maps and sell bus passes. So you kind of incorporate both things there for people. But sometimes they just don't know who to ask. I mean, in most of their minds, they might be thinking, what government office do I have to go to find out about transportation services? When in reality, they can come to their library and do that. Elizabeth said, how do those of you using Dave Ramsey FPU remove the religious aspects? I'll throw that out to you. One thing you might do is just up front say that this has a religious aspect and we hope you'll be open-minded and go ahead and take the lessons that can be learned, because certainly they don't have to do any of the stuff that relates to the religious aspect, do they? He talks about tithing and things like that, but you could just make it very obvious that you're aware that it's there. We hope that doesn't offend anybody, because what we want you to do is get the help that several million people have taken advantage of to get themselves out of debt and to move forward with their lives. So that might be one way, Elizabeth, and hopefully other people are typing in as well. Yep, there you go. Mention it. Just say we hope you'll be open-minded and come anyway, because there's a 5% religious aspect, and then 95% of it can change your life, because it's going to help you pay off your bills and be more focused on not getting rich per se, but just being financially secure. Lena said MDPLS offers DMV services to certain locations. There you go. Gabe said, as long as you're upfront with what is in the material, most people will either avoid it or will just skip the religious aspect of the program. Absolutely. Joselina said, I hope that helped, Elizabeth. Bring other county services to the library. Sure. They're always looking for collaborations too, aren't they? Of ways they can help more people. There's a stigma to some county services, or people don't feel comfortable going there, or they have to sit for so long, or whatever it might be. The library, again, might be a more welcoming place. Terry said, be proactive with making patrons aware of brochures and flyers. Absolutely. Different outreaches. Yep. Okay, I know we are already 15 minutes away. When I developed this class, which was just for you, by the way, I hope you all feel special because I developed it with you in mind, and I hope to offer it now to more people. But You were my guinea pigs. Get it? Long tail marketing. They don't have a tail, I don't think, or if they do, it's very short. But anyway, I want to go through the rest of this to get your attention in case there's something else that might help. What I want you to think about is long tail marketing is about you understanding how unique your library is compared to the competition and within your community, how valuable you are. Because that's what it's going to do is it's going to show people how valuable you are in your community because you're unique. Think about this. When you think of your library and the competition, the strength of the library is what? Relationships. The competition is convenience, right? If you think about the strength of the library being relationships, and I put the question mark up there to have you fill them in, but I know I don't want to run out of time here. The strength of the library for limitations, or the limitation of the library might be staff and funding, but you can get more creative, can't you? On the other hand, the competition is very low touch. You have that strength of a relationship. The competition is very low touch. Google wished me a happy birthday a couple years ago by sending cupcakes across my screen when I signed on that morning, and it really ticked me off because it felt very invasive. But if I have a relationship with Jan Wilson and I walk into the library and she knows it's my birthday and she wishes me a happy birthday, I'm going to feel good about my library all day long, right? So keep that in mind. The convenience and the low touch the convenience may sound great, but because it's low touch with no relationship, it can be frustrating for people. So at the top of page 2, are there possibilities for collaboration? Well, we kind of touched on that, didn't we? We talked about county services. We've talked about maybe financial institutions, other providers, things like that. But think about that when think about the piece of your long tail first and what you would like to do to serve them. Then take a look at your own library, stretch yourself a bit, see what you could do about that. And if there isn't anything you could do about that, who could you reach out to help you serve that piece of your long tail? Think about what future trends might be for that niche. What's going to happen to people who are middle-aged now moving into that maybe 50, 60, 70-year-old age bracket? What kinds of things can you start doing for them, thinking about the trends that are happening right now, the trends of people doing all their banking online, of all those kinds of things. So that might be something you could think about. Number 8 talks about a book that's called Marketing That Matters. They talk about 8 principles when you're trying to reach a multicultural audience, which all of you are. Even though you may not be thinking specifically about culture when you're thinking about the long tail, you might want to keep things in mind because they also apply to other niche markets. So check your assumptions at the door. We make a lot of assumptions not only about culture, we also make assumptions about age. We make assumptions about gender. We make assumptions about whatever, and life stage even. And so we need to step back from that, don't we? I hope I've helped you do a little bit of that today, talking from the aspect of I'm in an over 55 community. Somebody asked me the other day, when are you going to retire? And I said, I hope never. I don't work. I love what I do. I've done this before without pay. I don't want to do that in the future. I have bills to pay, but I don't want to retire. And people assume that I'm going to retire and that I'm just pining away and I can't wait to do that. So we need to check our assumptions at the door to be able to serve those pieces of our long tail effectively. Understand the context of your audience. Do your homework about them. Get some feedback from them. Get input from them, because unless you're living that life, you don't understand that life. This is a real picture of my dog Brody. And my dog Brody was abused for 3 years. I'm just using this as a weird example. But when we go outside, he doesn't like to walk very far, and he doesn't like to walk if there's anybody at all behind him, even within a block. And I think it's because of his abuse. He will stand like a cement block and not move. I have to understand that about him to serve him well. When I first got him, I tried to make him move because I thought he needs to walk. He needs to walk. You can tell he hasn't missed any meals. So he needs to walk. And then I figured out, somebody gave me a novel actually. It talked about dogs and a detective and this and that. And it said, remember the dog, it's the dog's walk. And I thought, you know what? If that scares him to have somebody behind him, we either get far enough away right away so it doesn't bother him, or I just stop and wait for somebody to pass us. You need to understand the context of your audience. Where are they coming from? When I mentioned the grandparents that are raising their grandkids, the context of that is so unique to a family dynamic compared to what we might be used to, that we need to check that assumption at the door, don't we? And understand the context of what that person who thought they were going to be retiring and now they're raising a young child, what they're going through. Invest before you request. And what I mean by that is not money. I mean, invest your time in learning about what is needed, what kind of community partnerships could you do, what kind of collaborations could you come up with. You want to invest in that and not just run out tomorrow and run to the bank and say, we need somebody from your financial department to come and speak at the library. You don't really know that yet. So invest your time before you request help from other people or other entities. You want to develop authentic relationships with, even with the pieces of your long tail marketing. Guess what? If you develop a relationship with one of those pieces, they'll tell you more of what they need. You won't have to do surveys and all that kind of thing because you've developed a relationship. It's authentic. They know you want to help. And so they will give you more information to continue on serving their particular piece of that tail. You want to also build shared ownership of what you're doing for them. You want to have them involved, don't you? They need to care about the fact that you're offering this for them. Because we talked earlier about you want to develop that loyalty, you want to develop that longevity of them coming back for more and more. And so when you build that shared ownership of tapping into what they need, asking them what they need, all those kinds of things, then they feel invested in whatever it is you're trying to do for them. They're more willing to tell you next time what they need. And Terry made the comment, I'm sorry I missed that, Terry, earlier. I'm raising 3 grandchildren. They look forward to coming back. There you go. It's a different life that we have nowadays. So keep that in mind as you're looking at these different categories. Walk your talk. In other words, lead by example. Are you doing it just to get a check mark off of, okay, we created a new program. We said in our grant we were going to have a new program this year, check mark, check mark, check mark? Or are you actually invested in them, sharing that ownership for what will make their lives better? That wasn't our motto 20 years ago as libraries. It was, we have lots of books for you to read and some magazines too, and a few databases once the computer came along. But now, truly, if you think about what will make their lives better, that long tail becomes very appealing, doesn't it? Lena said we offer communication forms to get feedback from patrons, to have an idea of what type of services and programs they'd like the library to offer. Building a connection with families in the community. Absolutely. Here's something to think about, too, I'm going to challenge you all with. Don't forget that they have assumptions, don't they? So when we give them forms to get feedback, that's excellent. But don't forget, they may not know what is in the realm of possibility. They may still be thinking games checked out, books checked out, reading programs for the kids, summer reading. That they may have tunnel vision as well, mightn't they? So you might actually have to give them some sort of fluffy kinds of ideas of things that might be feasible if it's needed in the community. Because when they look at a form, it might not occur to them that the library is willing to go beyond what their normal thought process is on a library services. Relate to them. Have empathy for them. I can hear that in your voices. In your voices in the chat box. I don't have any doubt that everybody in this room today has empathy. If we can leave our assumptions at the door, if we can really try to see what they need in the way of our services, then we're already relating to them. Yes, you want to give them guidance or ideas of things that might be feasible. Anticipate change. We know it's going to happen. So if you look ahead and say, okay, these are the people that are in my community. This is the head and the body. We're taking care of them really well. We still need to be aware of changes coming up, but let's look at our tail and make sure the groups we're serving in our tail, what changes are they going to face? Are there new changes in what regulations might be for the homeless or for whatever? And we need to kind of anticipate that, don't we? So that we can be prepared to do even more. So I want you to think about this and list on your handouts or on your notes based on everything that we've discussed, and we have discussed a lot today. I love this. Thank you so much for being so willing to share. But I want you to list your own 2 niche markets that you may be able to serve. I'm not asking you to make a commitment to actually set up a program or to offer Financial Peace University or to do a genealogy session or whatever it might be. I just want you to open your mind to something you're not currently doing for one of these smaller groups of people that maybe have felt a little left out or don't even realize that they could be included. Would you take a moment to think about that? And then we're going to wrap up the session. And if you'd like to share in the chat box, I'd love to see that. I can't come after you to see if you did do it. I won't do that. But sometimes just writing it down in front of other people makes us a little more committed to get serious about it. So right now you're just thinking about the actual market that you're going to look at. Like Doris said, life stages, maybe caregivers of adult parents. I see several of you typing. I love this, love this, love this. Y'all are so good at this. Thank you. Thank you for being willing to share with other people. Selena said new business owners, small business owners in the local area. That is always a challenge, Selena. It might be something as simple. I am a small business owner, I guess is what I'm categorized. I actually am just a sole proprietorship, self-employed by myself. But if you could do classes on what are the tools out there for people like me, for instance, I didn't know about a solo 401k until I heard it on Clark Howard a while back. And so that's a tool that I might be able to use because I don't have a 401k with an employer. I don't have an employer. So just keep aware of those kinds of things. So we talked about hairstyling. Whoops, I missed some here. Tutoring for students, since our library has lots of private tutors, great using the space, but parents still ask about free services. Sure. Hairstyling. Yeah, absolutely. Social needs, local schools, centers, caregivers within the community, story times and events, tech service classes, Excel, Word, Google Docs, mobile services. The next question kind of leads into what some of you have already talked about. What might you actually offer them? Some of you have given me the niche market, which is wonderful. That's what I asked for. Some of you have gone a little deeper and said exactly what you're going to do for that niche market. So now I want you to, if you didn't give me the actual service that you're going to provide, try to come up with an actual service that you'll provide. For the socially awkward, yeah, it might be maybe you just do some kind of interviewing skills or a practice date night or a whatever, a practice meeting new people night. Maybe you have people in small businesses who aren't used to going to networking events and you can help them get more comfortable. Yes, exactly, Nadine. Speed networking. Help them get more comfortable with that. Help them find a few phrases they feel comfortable with talking about so that they can meet people. Terry said family read time is the specific service that they're going to offer. Now, here's another question. How are you going to market what you're going to offer to them, to that niche market? How are you going to find them and make sure they know about it? Selena said, with new business owners, co-working space, meeting rooms, host a business networking group, workshops on business marketing, and other topics. Absolutely. Elizabeth said, I just read an article about a meetup group called the Antisocial Social Club. That would be Linda Bruno. I'm an introvert. I love my job, but I'm an introvert. For people who don't naturally know how to make friends, to make new friends. And here's the thing to think about too. If they're truly introverts like I am, introverts don't like to have 187 friends. They might want 8 and they're closer relationships. And that's okay too, isn't it? Then you might have the extroverts. Maybe they're new in town. Maybe they just changed jobs, whatever it is, and they feel a little bit out of water. And those might be the people where you reach out to more people. Jan said, I'd love to see a life class to teach today's children what they need to apply for a job, how to dress, etc. And I know some schools are teaching finance classes, but not enough of them are. And that might be something too. Maybe young people recently out of the military. They are just almost not keeping their heads above water. And I'm not talking financially, I'm talking about just being back in real life. Lena said they're going to hand out flyers, do different outreach within the community, speak with parents or the adults responsible for the child about the interest in the subject. Absolutely all of the above. I have card decks to collect. You can put different things on card decks, and if they collect all of them, they'll have all of the information about whatever it is you're going to offer them. Door hangers, if it's appropriate. Selena said marketing to the public, join the Chamber of Commerce, attend those networking meetings, speak at a chamber event or a Kiwanis event or a Lions event or any number of other organizations. Public speaking, right, Selena? I did not even pay her to say that. She just happened to coordinate with me. Gabe said attend festivals and events to be able to hand out flyers and speak with people about what we're offering and what our goals are. People need to know that, don't they? Because sometimes when we explain what we're offering, they think, well, that doesn't apply to me. But you know what? Maybe it does. So, wrapping it up, what's one idea I'm going to use from today's session to make sure I catch them by the tail? By when and what's your first step? You can put that down on your bottom of your page on page 2. So, just think about that. If you have access to public service announcements on the radio or a local TV station, that might be another way to market what you're going to do because it's public service. You might print up little business cards with just the name of the library and the event and the time. They're fairly inexpensive. If you want to order it, you don't even have to print them. If you want to get maybe your friends of your library or maybe somebody else would sponsor 500 business cards for $10 from Vistaprint with the information printed that you need for your event. So something along those lines. Wow. I'm tired. You all wore me out today. This has been fabulous. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you'll consider coming to the Baby Boomers session we're going to have in July, face to face at the Swiftland office, because we need a good amount of people to generate a lot of ideas for that particular program. But it's very needed. I can tell you as a baby boomer, it is needed. So thanks for joining us. Go and be a master at customer service by catching them by the tail. See you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Linda, for a wonderful webinar this afternoon. Attendees, if you enjoyed this webinar, we ask that you join us next week, March 20th, for Linda's next webinar, Turning Outward. As always, we encourage you to keep an eye on the Swiftland CE calendar, the Swiftland Facebook page, or your message from the listserv. Thank you everyone for attending and have a great rest of your day.